What would happen if you combine the strategy of Epic 7, the gameplay loop of Musume, and the visuals of Star Rail? You would end up with a pretty interesting game. The game in question being Star Savior, a somewhat new gacha game released by Studio B-Side, the same developers behind Counterside. The first step you're going to take when trying to build a character in this game is to get their Stellar Archive, and the way you get that is by doing a run with them. The reason why the Stellar Archive is so important is because if you take a look here, each character I have in the top right has a letter grade, right? C plus C plus B. What these are the Stellar Archives. As you can see, the Stellar Archives are the post-run stats and skills that you have. If I click here, I've done 3 runs with Charlotte. Each has a varying career rating, and if you check the blue numbers, it changes each time I swap. If I go equipped, it'll tell me the stat difference, right? This old one has less power, I have much less attack, less HP, less defense, and then I get a minor boost in all these other stats. Overall, I want to pick the one with higher stats. So you're going to be trying to get runs where you get core stats and get the good skills. Once you've decided on a character you want to run, the first thing you're going to do is set up their inheritance and inspiration. For the most part, the inspirations work the exact same as in Umuzume. However, during your career, instead of an inspiration event, you will be joined directly by your team member. Your team member will actually be there to help you during the turn-based combat that you will encounter during your career. After that, you select your support cards, and the only difference from Umuzume is that there's no borrow slot, so there's only 5 cards that you will have in your deck. On the left here, you can see we have 5 different stats. We have Strength, which increases your flat attack, Vitality, which increases your flat HP, Endurance, which is flat defense, and Focus and Protection, which are effect hit rate and effect resistance, respectively. Potential points are just your skill points. Okay, I should bring this up while I can show it right now. You can see how my energy is probably 40%-ish. I don't know, maybe that's a little under. In any case, it's between 38 and like 45, slightly under half. In Umusume, 38 to 45 would be around a 10% fail rate. It would be pretty low. In this game, however, once you fall below the 50 energy mark, your failure rate goes up insanely high, which is kind of odd, I thought, because I would argue that it's not that intuitive for you to have an energy bar if the energy bar is not actually consistent. And you can even see here that the focus and protection trainings, which are pretty much the wit equivalents to this game, because in Umusume, when you click on wit, you get a bit of energy, right? In Star Savior, when you click on focus and protection, you also get a bit of wit. The difference is that focus and protection suffer from the same failure rate as the normal trainings, which doesn't really make sense to me, because while you do get energy back, you also get much less stats overall. On the topic of focus and protection, we can bring up the fact that these 2 stats are not super necessary on a majority of the characters. Yes, it's nice to have a bit of effect hit rate, and it's nice to have a bit of effect res, but bar the tanks and debuffers, I would say, you do not need these stats on every character. In Umusume, having a bit of every stat is going to be good. Even Guts, which is widely regarded as the worst stat, even has its uses. Even for the CM11 that we are going through right now, you still need to have a bit of Guts because it is going to help with your stamina consumption. That is one of the things that makes Umusume's training facility so effective, is that having every single stat is going to be useful. In this game, some of the clicks are borderline troll. You can see here we have a support card event, or an Arcana event as it's called. One of the things you take for granted after playing Umusume is the quality of life change that they gave back in, I don't remember when it was. I want to say it was November 11th, but who knows. In any case, the event screen where it tells you the outcomes that you'll get after selecting a certain option, that is helpful. This game doesn't have that. Star Savior just decides that, you know what, we don't need that. And so you're either forced to search it up, or you're just going to click on a random option until you understand what it is that you're clicking. For the story, you have the option to choose between the main story and the character events. There are no dedicated character stories yet, as far as I'm concerned, but what I can say about the main story, even though I've only read the first 2 chapters, is that it feels very webtoonish or manhwa-esque. And I would say that's because it is a regression story, and I am incredibly biased towards regression stories because I think they're incredibly fun to read and watch, so I have actually been enjoying the story quite a bit. So while I can't speak for how well written the overall story is, I can say that it is actually kind of enjoyable to read. So I would actually say, unless you're a hyper-competitive player whose only goal is to reach the top of the ladder, the story is actually worth giving a try, because not only is it fully voiced, the story is actually not a nothing burger either. But to be honest with you, the bar for writing in gacha games is all the way down in hell. On the other hand, the character stories are pretty standard in the sense that about halfway through or so, maybe a little before that, you are exposed to the character, the one that you're playing, their vulnerabilities or some sort of slump that they're going through, right? And after that, at the end of the journey rather, you have solved their problems. The difference between this and Umusume is that for a majority of the careers, the player and the character are as close to lovers as possible without explicitly saying that they are or doing anything that would make the game an 18+. Which is a different approach from Umusume because the only 2 careers that I can say for certain that approach the trainer-Uma dynamic in that sort of way would be Nice Nature and Mejuro Arden, right? Like those 2 I can say for certain are very much so more romantically inclined than the other careers in Umusume. They are the exceptions, not the standard. In this game, however, these are the standards set by the characters. The strongest selling point, in my opinion, for Star Savior would be the visuals. The art style and models of this game are incredibly high quality. And you can see the details in 3D models, not just in the skills and ultimates that already look incredibly good, but also when the characters are talking to each other, because when you enter the visual novel style format, you can see the expressions of the characters change in a way that seems extremely fluid and animated. In this regard, I would say that it's not an exaggeration to claim that they have captured the Umusume style charm when it comes to the character and card events. There are a lot of banners in this game. You can see here we have the Raid Up. This is the current dark character, I think. Then you have the light dark banner, generic. Then you have the paid banners. You have the standard banners, standard banner characters, standard banner support card. You have the friendship pulls, and you have the friendship card pulls. So, we see here that when I open up the observation, the single pulls are 200, and the 10 pulls are 2000, right? So it's pretty standard. The rates, however, are very high, 4% for an SSR. This is probably the highest out of any of the gacha games that I've played. The one thing that is cause for concern is that the rate up is only a 1%, so instead of a 50-50, you're running a 25-75. The rates are the same for the Arcana, except instead of a 25-75, you're doing a 50-50, so it's still 4%, but the Arcanas are a bit more generous. Probably the best part about this gacha system, however, is that even though it's a spark system, you don't actually lose your spark after the banner goes away. Instead, it carries over and you can burn the spark at a later time. This is honestly probably the best part that I like about this gacha, because I have a gambling addiction actually. I would like to send polls on random characters and try and get them. So having a system that would allow me to do that, honestly, there was really no chance that I was going to hate this at all. So while the game is in fact very generous, it is not without good reason. If we check my Lacey here, we can see that she is 0 out of 3 limit break. Right? 0. This is just how she is when you pull her out of the box. So, the first limit break you get the max affection increase, which is pretty relevant, but you also get a unique passive skill enhancement. What is this unique passive skill enhancement, you ask? Well, we can see for the base Lacey, you get 6% action gauge, and you heal when you are attacked by an enemy that you have debuffed, right? The level 2 increases attack by 5%, and the rest of the skills remains the same. 5% attack is not that much. Good, so it doesn't actually matter that much then. Well, for the most part. If you see my Ashura here, her limit break, the unique skill. So, level 1, it's just 5% max health. Whatever, who cares, right? It's a little bit of HP. The level 2, however, Ashura heals the ally with the lowest current health after using her auto attack. Increases self dual attack chance by 10% for each stack of insight on self. So, from one limit break, your auto attack now gets transformed to heal your lowest health ally, and you can start dual attacking. This is quite the power boost. And this is really where the concern comes in, right? Because depending on how many characters are going to be dependent on one limit break, the game might not actually be that generous overall. Of course, so far, I think Ashura Alt is the only one that gets such a massive power boost, at least out of the ones I have. But because this is a PvP gacha game, if you weren't going to spend on the game, or you weren't willing to whale on the game, then you weren't really ever going to be at the top of the ladder regardless, right? You weren't the target demographic. So I guess the question, rather than being framed as how generous is the game, is how much of the game can you experience without being a whale? But I will say, if you look at it strictly from a polling perspective, overall it is pretty generous. A lot of the polls did come from the events, however, which are probably the launch rewards, so if you do download this at a later time, then you're probably not going to get as many polls. With all of this information, we can finally ask ourselves the question, should you play Star Savior? I think Star Savior benefits from the fact that it takes a lot of its inspiration and aspects from Epic 7 and Umusume because it utilizes them in a way that feels refreshing. The gear doesn't feel tedious to farm because once you clear the stage, you can start sweeping the battles using your energy, and even if your favorite character isn't super popular, you still get to fully experience their arc purely because they're not tied down to the main story. It does warrant quite a bit of time put into it, because inherently the Umusume style training does require you to be very hands-on at times. There is, however, an actual button to automatically do the journey for you. While it won't net you the best results, it is a very handy button to have. If you are going to play this, I would say you should probably make it your main game, unless you are going to play it very casually like me and not obsess over the PvP scene. Ultimately, because the game takes a lot of aspects from Epic 7, Umusume, and Star Rail and makes them feel polished and refined, I would say that the game is definitely worth giving a try and I would recommend it.